Snow fell like ash over the plains of Manchuria, covering what was left of a war that refused to end. The wind howled through the empty villages, where only the echo of boots and the clatter of hooves had once broken the silence. Somewhere in that endless white, a lone horse stood tethered beside a burnt-out cart, his dark mane glistening with frost. They said he belonged to a soldier who never returned. They said he waited for him still. The soldiers had named him Kaze, meaning wind. He had been trained for the imperial army, born in a stable that smelled of smoke and oil, raised to carry men through mud and blood. Yet there was something different about him, something that made even the roughest riders lower their voices when they spoke his name. Kaze was calm when gunfire screamed. He never flinched at the thunder of artillery. Some said he could sense death before it came. In 1944, when Japan's empire stretched thin and starving, Kaze was sent north with a young lieutenant named Hayato Mori. Hayato was barely 20, a boy with the face of a poet and the eyes of someone already older than the world. He had been given command of a dwindling supply unit, nothing glorious, just carts, rifles and a handful of exhausted men. Yet to him Kaze was not a tool of war. He was a companion. The two learned to move as one through the frozen wilderness, a rhythm of breath and hooves that defied the chaos swallowing their country. Every night, when the soldiers built their fires low to avoid enemy patrols, Hayato would brush the frost from Kaze's coat and whisper to him as if confessing sins. He spoke of the sea he missed, of the mother he hadn't written to in months, of the war he no longer believed in. The horse would lower his head and listen, eyes glimmering like black glass. In those moments, Hayato felt as if the universe still held something pure. But war has no patience for tenderness. By winter's end, the Soviets advanced across Manchuria with fire and steel. Japanese lines crumbled like old paper. Hayato's unit was ordered to hold a bridge that no longer mattered. Artillery rained down for 3 days. Men vanished into smoke, the earth itself seemed to bleed. When the command to retreat came, there was nothing left to retreat with, only Kaze standing amid the ruins, his flanks streaked with mud and ash. Hayato climbed onto his back, whispering one word, "Ika, let's go." They rode through the burning trees, through fields littered with helmets and rifles, through villages already lost to silence. The snow turned pink beneath Kaze's hooves. For miles, it seemed the world had narrowed to 2 beating hearts and the sound of distant thunder. When the lieutenant was hit, it was sudden. A sharp burst of fire, a shout, then nothing but falling snow. Kaze stopped. Hayato slipped from the saddle, blood pooling dark against the ice. The horse turned, nudging him, waiting for him to rise. When he didn't, Kaze stood guard, hours, then days, refusing to move even as the wind cut deeper. Locals who found the scene later swore they saw the animal standing over the body like a monument carved from grief. And still he did not die. They came for him days later. Villagers, ragged and trembling, scavenging for anything the war had not already stolen. They approached carefully, whispering prayers under their breath. The body of the soldier was frozen, his face turned toward the gray sky, and beside him stood the horse, ribs showing, eyes dark and still. When they tried to move him, he refused. When they pulled at his reins, he reared back, letting out a low, broken cry that echoed through the empty valley. So they left him there. Days turned to weeks. Snow melted into black mud, and still the horse waited. People began to talk, first in hushed tones, then in wonder. They said a spirit had bound him to the fallen soldier, that Kaze could not cross to the next life until his master did. Travelers came to see him. Soldiers who had lost everything would kneel before him, some offering a handful of grain, others just silence. It was as if the animal carried all their grief for them. Then one morning when the sky burned red with dawn, Kaze was gone. No one saw him leave. They only found the trampled earth where he had stood, and the trail of hoofprints heading east, toward the mountains where the last Japanese regiments had vanished. Some said he went looking for his master's spirit. Others said he had gone mad. But those who had seen his eyes before swore it was neither madness nor instinct. It was purpose. Weeks later, a group of retreating soldiers stumbled upon him again, a lone horse wandering through the smoke and snow, dragging behind him a tattered saddle stained with blood. They tried to capture him, but each time they approached, he bolted, only to return when night fell, watching them from a distance. They began to leave food out for him, speaking softly as if to an old comrade. The youngest of them, a boy not yet 18, claimed that when he looked into the horse's eyes, he felt as if someone was still alive inside. They called him Kami no Uma, the horse of the gods. The legend grew. Soldiers whispered that Kaze could sense danger. Before ambushes, he would stamp his hooves and snort at the darkness. Twice his warning saved them. Once, when Soviet patrols drew near, he refused to move forward, and within an hour, gunfire erupted ahead. The unit avoided certain death. The survivors began to believe he carried the spirit of their fallen brothers. But even legends are mortal. By 1945, Japan had surrendered. The empire was gone, and the soldiers scattered into prisoners, ghosts of their former selves. The unit disbanded in silence, and no one saw Kaze again. Yet stories began to surface. A farmer in Hokkaido swore he'd seen a dark horse appear during a storm, standing motionless beside a shrine before vanishing at sunrise. A monk claimed that a horse with eyes like obsidian appeared at the temple gates each winter, waiting for something, or someone, that never came. Years later, when the war had turned into a story children barely believed, an old man walked the ruins of Manchuria. He had once been a soldier under Lieutenant Mori. His hair was white now, his hands trembling, but he carried a photograph, a faded image of a young man beside a proud, dark horse. He found the place where his commander had fallen. The bridge was gone, the forest swallowed by time, but there, half buried in moss, lay a rusted horseshoe. He knelt and whispered, "Okiri, welcome home." And in that moment, the wind rose, soft at first, then wild, circling him with the sound of distant hooves. He closed his eyes, and for an instant, he swore he could hear breathing beside him. When he opened them again, he was alone. Only the snow moved, curling through the trees like smoke from a fire long dead. Some say Kaze still roams that land, not as a ghost but as something older. A spirit that carries the memory of loyalty through a world that forgets too easily. A whisper of a time when even in the darkest war, one soul refused to leave another behind. And when the wind moves across the Manchurian plains, it sounds like hooves against frozen ground, a rhythm that never truly stopped. Years passed, but the story of the horse who refused to die would not. It drifted across the sea with the refugees and the soldiers who returned home, carried in whispers from campfires to temples, from sake bars to the quiet countryside. In Japan, where the scars of war cut deeper than any blade, people clung to stories that made sense of their pain. And somehow the story of Kaze, the horse who would not abandon his master, became something more than a tale. It became a prayer. Mothers told it to their children as they tucked them into bed, their voices trembling when they reached the part where the horse stood alone in the snow. Soldiers returning from the front, stripped of their honor and haunted by ghosts, spoke of Kaze with a kind of reverence. They said he reminded them that loyalty had not died even when everything else had. Some began leaving small offerings at shrines, a piece of straw, a carved wooden horse, a drop of sake, for the spirit of the one who had stayed behind. In the north, at a monastery half swallowed by pine forests, monks began to keep records of sightings. Travelers claimed that when the fog was thickest, a dark horse would appear on the edge of the forest road, watching silently before vanishing into the mist. No one ever heard his hooves. Only the rustle of branches as if the air itself bowed to him. The monks called him Kaze no Reikon, the soul of the wind. One monk, an old man who had once served as a medic in the army, began to paint him. In every painting, the horse's eyes were black mirrors, reflecting the faces of the lost. When asked why he kept painting the same creature, the monk would only say, "Because he reminds me of the things that should have died but didn't." The legend deepened when a great storm struck the region in 1952. The river flooded, swallowing fields and villages. Amid the chaos, a farmer's son claimed he saw a horse running through the waters, carrying 2 children on its back toward higher ground. When rescuers arrived the next morning, they found the children alive, unconscious but unharmed, and hoof prints in the mud that led into the forest, fading where the earth rose toward the mountains. No one ever found the horse. The newspapers didn't believe it. The government dismissed it as superstition. But the villagers knew. They said Kaze had returned once more, not to fight but to save. Soon after, shrines began appearing across the countryside, small and unmarked, with offerings of hay and carved wooden horses. Truck drivers would bow before them on long journeys. Fishermen would whisper Kaze's name before setting sail, asking the spirit to bring them home safe. The legend had outgrown the war. It had become something eternal, a reminder that even when humanity loses its way, nature remembers. Decades later, when the world had moved on to new wars and new machines, an old man visited one of those shrines. He had been a child when the soldiers returned home, carrying stories instead of victories. In his trembling hands he held a medal, one that had belonged to Lieutenant Hayato Mori. He placed it at the foot of the shrine and whispered, "He's waiting for you." That night, a storm rolled over the mountains. Witnesses said they heard thunder that sounded like galloping hooves. Others claimed the wind carried a faint cry, somewhere between a horse's whinny and a human breath. And when morning came, the metal was gone, only a single black strand of horsehair remained, coiled gently around the offering bowl. By the 1970s, the legend of Kaze was so deeply woven into folklore that it blurred with faith itself. Some believed he was a kami, a divine spirit sent to remind mankind of devotion. Others said he was the restless soul of every animal dragged into human wars, a silent witness who could not rest until peace was real. And still others whispered that he was neither ghost nor god, but memory, the living echo of loyalty that refused to fade. To this day, truckers still leave apples by the roadside shrines in northern Japan. Monks still light incense for the horse who refused to die. And sometimes, on windless nights, travelers claim they hear hooves in the distance. A slow, steady rhythm, fading into silence as if time itself were bowing to something far older than war. Some legends are carved in stone. Others are written in blood. But the most enduring ones are carried by the wind. And somewhere beyond the forests of Manchuria, the wind still moves in a pattern that sounds like galloping, slow, steady, eternal, as if the earth remembers the horse who refused to die. Generations passed and the world moved on, but the story of Kaze refused to vanish. War memorials rose across Japan, yet none spoke of him directly. Still, veterans returning from the front lines whispered his name in quiet bars and tea houses. They remembered the dark horse whose loyalty had defied death itself, whose presence had comforted soldiers in frozen forests, whose eyes had mirrored the pain of men who had survived only to carry ghosts with them. In Tokyo, an aging historian discovered old journals in a forgotten archive. The brittle pages detailed supply routes, soldiers' movements, and references to the black horse that never faltered. Some dismissed it as fanciful writing, a soldier's attempt to find meaning in the chaos. But others, the ones who had known the soldiers personally, recognized the truth. Every note, every sketch of hoofprints in mud, matched the oral stories passed down from Manchuria. Kaze was real. Children began to hear the stories as part of school lessons about the war. Teachers described not just strategy in battles, but courage and loyalty in the unlikeliest forms. Some students laughed at the idea of a horse standing guard over a fallen soldier. Others, hearing older veterans recount the events, would sit silently, imagining black eyes gleaming through snow and fog, a presence both terrifying and comforting. Travelers began reporting strange encounters on old battlefields. Some swore they felt an invisible weight behind them when walking alone in the forest. Some claimed their dogs would stiffen and stare into empty trees. Hooves would echo in the distance, yet no animal was ever found. Locals said it was Kaze, still roaming, still watching, still waiting for someone long gone. In the mountains, hikers left offerings of apples and carrots at small, makeshift shrines. Monks tended candles near the paths where Kaze had once been seen, murmuring prayers for courage and remembrance. And though no one could see him, the presence was undeniable, a feeling of warmth and loyalty that transcended fear and time. Foreign journalists who visited the northern plains were baffled. They reported hearing stories that sounded too mythic to be true, tales of a horse who survived battles, floods, and starvation, who saved children and inspired men, who had witnessed the horrors of a war no human should survive. Many scoffed, dismissing it as folklore. But in the eyes of the villagers, the veterans, the monks, and even the soldiers' families, Kaze's story carried the weight of undeniable truth, a reminder that loyalty and courage often come in forms that human history cannot fully account for. Decades after the war, a retired soldier, once a boy watching Kaze beside the frozen river, returned to the old battlefield with trembling legs. He carried nothing but memories and the weight of the years. As he walked through the snow-covered plains, he felt a presence beside him, a soft brush of wind across his face, a rhythm beneath his feet like distant hooves. Tears ran down his face as he whispered into the emptiness, "You waited for us all this time." That night, the wind carried the faintest sound, a snort, a pawing of hooves on frozen earth, the echo of life in a world that had moved on. Kaze had become more than a horse. He had become a story, a spirit, a living echo of the men, children, and soldiers whose lives had intersected with his. The old soldier returned home, carrying nothing tangible from the plains, yet heavier with understanding. Kaze's story was no longer just his own memory, it belonged to everyone who had heard it, to everyone who had believed that loyalty, courage, and the refusal to die could transcend death itself. Even today, when the wind rushes across northern Japan and the plains of Manchuria, some say it is the rhythm of hooves, slow, steady, eternal. Some say it is a warning. Some say it is a blessing. And some who know the story simply close their eyes and remember that once, a horse refused to die, and in doing so, taught the world that love, loyalty, and courage can live forever, even in the darkest times. By the late 20th century, the war had become a distant memory for most, yet Kaze's legend traveled quietly, carried by those who remembered or had been told the story. In small villages along the northern plains, elders still spoke of the black horse with eyes like polished stone, the one who refused to abandon his fallen master. Tourists and researchers would arrive, notebooks in hand, searching for evidence, sketches of hoofprints, old journals, and even photographs that hinted at the impossible. One evening, a filmmaker arrived in the region, hoping to document forgotten stories of the war. Locals told him to go to the northern hills at sunset. As he climbed the slopes, the wind swept across the grasses, carrying a sound that made his pulse quicken. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a dark figure in the distance, a horse standing perfectly still, its silhouette outlined by the dying light. He raised his camera, but before he could focus, it vanished. Only the hoofprints remained in the soft earth, impossibly large, impossibly deep. Academics began writing papers about the phenomenon. Some dismissed it as folklore, a collective projection of trauma and memory. Others suggested it was a symbol, the war's brutality, survival, and loyalty condensed into a single animal that transcended reality. Yet eyewitness accounts continued to arrive, consistent and detailed. A black horse, often appearing near shrines, riverbanks, and forests, always at dawn or dusk, always alone, always silent except for the faintest sound of breathing or hoofbeats. Veterans' families began visiting these sites. Children traced the paths where the horse had been seen, placing offerings of carrots, apples, or small wooden carvings. Some spoke aloud to him, sharing stories of their ancestors who had walked beside Kaze, fought alongside him, or simply watched him endure when everything else fell apart. The horse had become a bridge across generations, linking the living with those lost in the snow, in the mud, and on the bloodied fields. In time, a small museum in northern Japan dedicated a section to him, not officially but quietly, with photographs of horses in battle, sketches from survivors, and preserved items like a rusted bridle and worn saddle said to have belonged to Kaze. Visitors would stand in silence, feeling a strange presence, a chill in the air, a heartbeat in the stillness. Children would lean close to the glass, whispering, "Are you really here?" And for a moment, the museum felt alive, as though the legend itself had taken residence. Kaze's story spread internationally as well. Foreign historians, captivated by the improbable survival of a single horse through the chaos of Manchuria and Japan, translated oral accounts and archived journals. In Europe, readers marveled at tales of animals and war, but none matched the mysterious loyalty and near-supernatural endurance of Kaze. In America, articles in magazines and journals recounted the events as war folklore, yet even skeptics admitted something about the story defied explanation. Children's books, novels, and graphic novels eventually immortalized him. Artists painted him as a spectral figure against snow-laden plains. Writers described the whisper of hooves as a metaphor for memory, loyalty, and grief. He became more than a horse. He became a symbol, a silent witness to the horrors of human conflict, a guardian of memory, a reminder that courage and devotion are not limited to humans. Even in the present day, hikers and travelers along the northern Manchurian plains tell the same story. On quiet mornings, when the fog drifts low across frozen rivers and abandoned villages, they swear they hear hoofbeats echoing softly over the snow. They see movement at the edge of the trees, dark against the gray sky. And for those who know the legend, the sound is unmistakable, the rhythm of a horse who refused to die, carrying the memory of all those lost in a war that sought to erase everything. Kaze had become eternal, not in stone or ink, but in the air, the snow, the wind, and the quiet spaces where memory lingers. A horse that survived the impossible, whose loyalty outlasted death, whose spirit still walked the frozen forests of history. And as long as the wind moved through the northern plains, as long as people remembered the horrors and sacrifices of the past, Kaze would never truly leave. For those willing to listen, he was still there, a dark figure at the edge of vision, a heartbeat in the silence, the eternal witness to a war that claimed millions, but could not claim loyalty, courage, or love. In recent years, scientists and historians have visited the northern plains, searching for evidence. Hoofprints preserved in mud, old saddles buried beneath the forest floor, fragments of journals mentioning the black horse. Most found nothing tangible. Yet, in every interview, every recorded story, there was a consistency impossible to ignore. Kaze moved as if guided by something beyond instinct. He appeared when hope was fading, vanished when fear grew too strong, and returned only when someone needed him most. A young boy, the grandson of a soldier who had once served under Lieutenant Mori, recounted a tale to his teacher in a quiet classroom in Hokkaido. He spoke of shadows at the edge of the forest, of a dark horse standing silent, watching over him as he gathered firewood. When he approached, it vanished, leaving only the faint impression of hooves in the snow. His teacher listened, skeptical at first, then hushed, sensing the weight of a story older than the boy himself. The legend had passed into a new generation. Photographers traveling the region claimed to capture strange images: fleeting shapes at dawn, a dark silhouette disappearing into fog, patterns in the snow that seemed unnaturally precise. Each photograph was grainy, blurred, often dismissed as coincidence. Yet in every one the presence felt alive, the ghost of a horse that had refused to die, still bound to the memory of men lost, and to the lessons of loyalty, endurance, and devotion. Kaze's story became a lens through which people reflected on the horrors of war. Veterans of later conflicts spoke of him as inspiration. Children, reading the tales in schools, imagined courage not as something only humans possess. Poets wrote of him in quiet cafes. Musicians composed haunting melodies meant to evoke the rhythm of his hooves on frozen plains. Even philosophers began to use him as a symbol, the embodiment of loyalty beyond comprehension, the refusal to abandon those we love, the persistence of memory across generations. Some said that in moments of despair, when hope is fragile and the world feels indifferent, Kaze's spirit could be felt most clearly. A lost traveler, a soldier far from home, a child separated from family, all might catch the fleeting shadow of a dark horse at the edge of the forest, hear the rhythm of hooves in the wind, and feel a strange comfort as if someone had been waiting for them all along. In Japan, shrines dedicated to unknown war heroes sometimes contained small tokens for him: carrots, apples, wooden horses. Monks whispered prayers for courage, travelers left offerings, and children painted his image in chalk on temple steps. No one claimed ownership over him. He belonged to the wind, to memory, to all those who had suffered and survived. Even historians admitted, the story of Kaze cannot be fully proven. No official record exists of a horse who survived battles, starved through the winter, saved children, and became legend. Yet in every eyewitness account, in every whispered story passed through families, in every shadow glimpsed along snowy plains, the truth persisted. He had refused to die. And so, through decades, across generations, through peace and war, Kaze endured. Not in flesh, not in bone, not in metal or monument, but in the air, in the rhythm of hooves, in the silence between snow-laden trees. The horse who had once carried men through mud, smoke, and fire now carried memory itself, a living reminder that even in humanity's darkest hour, loyalty, courage, and love could survive. The wind still moves across Manchuria and northern Japan. Travelers pause and listen. Some say it is nothing. Others swear it is hooves on frozen ground. Those who know the story understand. It is Kaze, still running, still waiting, still refusing to die, a silent witness to the world that once forgot and now remembers. By the turn of the century, Kaze's story had spread far beyond Japan and Manchuria. Letters from travelers in Europe and North America described fleeting glimpses of a dark horse in foggy fields, always solitary, always silent. Some said it appeared in abandoned battlefields of other wars, as if drawn to places scarred by human violence. Photographers on research trips claimed to catch a shadow in the frame that moved like no ordinary animal, always at the periphery of vision, vanishing when approached. In small villages of northern Japan, Kaze became part of local ritual. Elderly farmers would leave small mounds of straw at crossroads where travelers might pass. Children would sketch him in notebooks, leaving them by the base of shrines as offerings. Monks would speak of him in hushed tones, not as a myth, but as a guardian spirit who reminded people of a time when loyalty transcended death. Pilgrimages formed, quietly, with no fanfare, to the old battle sites where he had been last seen alive. Documentaries and historical societies occasionally touched on his story, but always cautiously. Some dismissed it as folklore, a comforting myth created to help the survivors of war cope with grief. Yet for those who had family who fought in Manchuria or Hokkaido, Kaze's story felt as tangible as the frost underfoot or the echo of distant gunfire in the mountains. Veterans who had never seen him in life would swear, decades later, that they felt his presence, a steady heartbeat in the snow. One young woman, a historian's granddaughter, spent years piecing together oral accounts, family diaries, and wartime sketches. She traveled to old battlegrounds, speaking to villagers who remembered soldiers and their black horse. One winter morning she walked the frozen plains alone, hoping to feel what others had described. Hours passed, the cold biting at her fingers when she saw him, a dark figure standing at the edge of the fog. His eyes reflected the first light of dawn. He did not move and she did not breathe. Then, as silently as he appeared, he was gone. The imprint of hooves remained in the snow, impossibly deep, fading as the wind carried the memory away. Stories like hers multiplied. A retired soldier claimed he saw Kaze standing beside a river, water lapping gently at his hooves, watching silently as a family crossed safely. A monk swore the horse had guided a lost child through the forest, leading him back to his parents. Even skeptics who had studied the war accounts for decades could not fully explain the consistency of sightings, the emotional weight, or the impossibility of survival through fire, flood, and famine. In towns and cities, artists began creating murals depicting the black horse standing against snow and smoke, carrying the fallen, watching over the living. Music inspired by the legend emerged, haunting melodies with deep, resonant tones meant to evoke the rhythm of hooves on frozen ground. Writers included him in novels and graphic tales of war, blending history and myth, exploring themes of loyalty, survival, and the bond between human and animal in times of unimaginable hardship. Through it all, Kaze's essence remained the same: a guardian in shadow, a witness to humanity's worst moments, and a symbol of devotion that refused to end. He had become more than a horse. He was memory made flesh, loyalty made tangible, the embodiment of a quiet power that could not be measured in medals or records, only in the lives he touched and the hearts he inspired. Even today, travelers claim that when the wind sweeps across northern Japan and the plains of Manchuria, it carries a rhythm unmistakable, the faint, steady cadence of hooves. Some say it is a warning, some say it is comfort. For those who know the story, it is a reminder that courage and devotion can outlast war, death, and time itself. And somewhere beyond the forest's snow and fog, Kaze still moves, refusing to die, refusing to leave, carrying the memory of a war, a master, and a world that almost forgot him. In the 21st century, Kaze's story had reached far corners of the globe. Scholars, filmmakers, and enthusiasts traveled to Japan and the northern Manchurian plains, seeking the truth behind the legend. Yet no one could capture him, no one could fully prove he existed. And perhaps that was exactly what made him eternal. For those who had seen or thought they had seen, there was a quiet understanding: Kaze was not bound to flesh or form. He was bound to memory, to loyalty, to the moments that define courage in the face of impossible odds. Documentary crews captured testimonies from villagers, elderly veterans, and monks. Each story was slightly different, yet all shared the same core. A dark horse, black as midnight, appeared when the living needed guidance, protection, or hope. In some accounts, he carried supplies across battlefields, saving children or lost soldiers. In others, he simply appeared at the edge of vision, watching silently, never interfering directly, but always leaving an impression that hearts could feel. In small northern shrines, offerings continued. Visitors left apples, carrots, carved wooden horses, and notes of remembrance. They lit incense and whispered stories, asking Kaze to watch over their families, their travels, their struggles. Monks spoke of a horse who embodied the essence of compassion, bravery, and loyalty, a spirit who reminded humanity of the bonds that persist even in the shadow of war. Artists, inspired by the legend, began to depict Kaze not as a mere animal, but as a symbol of resilience. Painters portrayed him against smoky battlefields, snow-laden forests, and moonlit plains, his eyes reflecting the souls of the lost. Poets wrote of him in haunting verse. Musicians composed melodies that echoed the rhythm of hooves, slow and steady, carrying with them the heartbeat of history itself. Travelers and hikers still claim sightings. A group trekking through abandoned Manchurian villages reported seeing a dark horse standing among the ruins, its breath visible in the cold morning air. When they approached, it disappeared, leaving hoofprints frozen in mud. A teacher leading students through the same forest described a shadow at the edge of the path, watching silently before vanishing into the fog. Each encounter reinforced the legend. Kaze was more than memory, he was presence itself. Historians began to interpret Kaze's story not as myth, but as a reflection of humanity's need to find meaning in tragedy. The horse had survived the worst of human violence and endured beyond it, becoming a living monument to loyalty and courage. Philosophers pondered his symbolic power, considering the ways in which his story bridged generations, cultures, and even species. In literature, Kaze appeared in novels blending history and legend. Children's books portrayed him as a brave companion, teaching lessons of loyalty, kindness, and endurance. Graphic novels captured the stark contrast of black against white snow, emphasizing the surreal yet powerful presence of a creature who refused to die. Scholars debated, readers wept, and every depiction carried the weight of his eternal vigil. Even today, when the wind sweeps across the northern plains, the rhythm of hooves can be heard. Some say it is imagination. Some say it is memory. And for those who know the story, it is proof. Loyalty, courage, and love can transcend death, war, and time itself. Kaze, the horse who refused to die, remains alive in the hearts of those who remember, moving silently through the fog of history, carrying the spirits of men, children, and animals lost to war. And somewhere beyond the forests, the ruins, and the snow-laden plains, the wind continues to whisper in the pattern of hooves, slow, steady, eternal, as if the world itself remembers the horse who refused to die. In recent decades, the legend of Kaze reached the ears of historians, filmmakers, and storytellers around the world. They came to the northern plains, cameras in hand, notebooks full of questions, hoping to capture the impossible, the spirit of a horse who had survived war, loss, and time itself. Each journey produced fleeting glimpses, blurred shadows and photographs, footprints frozen in mud, and moments that could never be fully explained. Yet the legend only grew stronger because of them. Villagers still tell stories late at night, around the warmth of small fires, of a black horse appearing when hope was fading. Travelers passing through abandoned battlefields speak of the sudden feeling of being watched, of shadows moving where none should be, of the faint, rhythmic echo of hooves over frozen soil. For those who know the tale, these are not coincidences. They are reminders that Kaze's loyalty and courage are eternal, unbound by life or death. In northern Japan, a small museum dedicated a quiet corner to Kaze. No plaque declared his name, no exhibition claimed his ownership. Instead, photographs, sketches, and faded journals spoke of him indirectly. Visitors often left small offerings: apples, carrots, wooden carvings, or even handwritten notes. Some returned years later to find their gifts untouched, as if the presents had accepted them, and some even vanished without a trace, leaving only the faint scent of earth and hay. Schools began incorporating his story into lessons on war and loyalty. Children were taught not just of battles and strategy, but of courage, devotion, and the unseen threads that connect lives. Teachers would recount the story of a horse who had stood by a fallen soldier, whose eyes reflected grief and determination, whose presence saved lives in the midst of chaos. Students listened in awe, some skeptical, some wide-eyed with belief, all carrying the story forward in their own hearts. Artists were drawn to Kaze as well. Painters depicted him against snow-laden forests and burning villages, capturing the contrast of black against white, shadow against light. Musicians composed haunting pieces meant to evoke the rhythm of his hooves on frozen plains. Poets wrote verses describing the loneliness, the loyalty, and the quiet power of a creature who refused to abandon the living or forget the dead. Every interpretation emphasized the same truth: Kaze was more than a horse. He was memory made manifest, loyalty made tangible, a witness to humanity's darkest hours. Historians debated endlessly, trying to separate fact from legend. They pored over surviving journals, sketches, and oral histories, analyzing inconsistencies and impossibilities. Yet every record told the same story: a horse whose courage and devotion transcended logic, who endured beyond the reach of war, starvation, and death. And in the eyes of those who had seen him, or believed they had, the legend was undeniable. Even outside Japan, Kaze became a symbol of hope. Articles in international magazines, documentaries on war legends, and books for children and adults alike carried his story across the world. In Europe, North America, and beyond, people spoke of a dark horse appearing in times of despair, reminding the living that loyalty and courage could persist even when everything else was lost. Today, pilgrims still walk the northern plains. They leave small offerings at shrines, whisper prayers in the wind, and feel the presence of something unseen watching over them. Some claim to have seen Kaze standing silently among the trees at dawn. Others report hearing hooves in the distance, soft and steady, fading as quickly as they came. Each encounter carries the same message: Kaze lives on, not as flesh and bone, but as spirit, memory, and the eternal witness to the loyalty, courage, and love that survived humanity's darkest hours. And as the wind moves across Manchuria and northern Japan, it carries with it a rhythm that will never stop: the rhythm of hooves, slow, steady, eternal, the heartbeat of a horse who refused to die, and in doing so reminded the world that some bonds, some acts of courage, and some spirits can never be broken. As decades passed, the legend of Kaze grew not just in Japan but across the world. Scholars, travelers, and storytellers kept retelling the story, each encounter adding a new layer: a child saved from the forest, a lost soldier guided home, a villager comforted in silence. Kaze had become more than memory. He had become a symbol, a quiet guardian whose presence reminded humanity of loyalty, courage, and hope. In a small northern village, an elderly man walked through the fields where Kaze had once been seen. His hands trembled and his eyes were clouded with age, yet he carried a photograph of a young soldier atop a dark horse, the edges frayed with time. He knelt in the snow, placing the photo against a small wooden shrine adorned with offerings of straw, apples, and incense. He whispered words no one else could hear. A greeting, a prayer, a thank you to a friend who had waited, who had survived, who had taught the world without words. At that moment, a soft wind rose, curling through the trees, brushing the snow like a gentle hand. The man felt it carry a weight, a presence, as if the horse himself had passed by to acknowledge the offering. The sound of hooves echoed faintly, impossibly distant yet deeply familiar. The old man closed his eyes and smiled, understanding that some stories never end, that some spirits never leave, and that loyalty once given is eternal. And so Kaze's story became immortal. Not in textbooks or monuments, but in the hearts of those who believed, in the whispers of the wind across northern Japan and Manchuria, and in the rhythm of hooves that still echo through memory. He had witnessed the worst of humanity and endured, becoming a guardian, a legend, a silent reminder that courage, devotion, and love can survive even the most terrible wars. In the end, Kaze did not merely live, he transcended life. He became the echo of loyalty in a world that often forgets, a shadow in the snow that teaches the living to remember, and a heartbeat carried by the wind for all who pause and listen. And somewhere, beyond the forests, across frozen plains and silent villages, he still moves, the horse who refused to die, forever part of history, forever part of the human heart. The wind rises again, soft at first, then with strength, and in its rhythm, if one listens closely, one can hear it, the steady, eternal cadence of hooves, the song of a legend, the presence of Kaze, and the memory of a bond that even death could not sever. The story ends not with silence, but with the wind, carrying the pulse of life, loyalty, and love across the plains. A reminder that some spirits are too strong, too enduring to ever truly fade. And in that wind, Kaze runs on.